Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
A lot of these AI startups to get from 0 to like 2 billion, 3 million, it's happening in months. This is going to force the hand of the enterprises as well to move quickly. The only ones which will survive are which like wholeheartedly embrace the GenAI.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Welcome back to Convergence FM, folks. My guest today is Karthik Suresh. He's the co-founder and CPTO of O, a no-code platform that helps non-technical teams and users turn manual workflows into fully automated systems using teams of AI agents. And yeah, I'm a sucker for a good play on words, and O is an amazing name for a company focused on building agents. Karthik's background spans high-frequency trading, startup 0 to 1 journeys, and big tech. He was the first employee at Kraft, where he helped the company find product market fit through multiple pivots, and we get to hear about that. He then joined Meta, working as a product manager on Facebook Search, and later at Reality Labs, driving growth for products like Oculus and Portal. From there, he co-founded Ignition and eventually spun out O, where it became clear that GenAI and agent-based software weren't just a feature shift, but a platform shift. In the episode, we get tactical and honest about what it really takes to build agentic workflows that work in production. Karthik shares how most agent platforms tend to fail, not because of model quality, but because of missing architectural patterns, a lack of real eval frameworks, and a tendency to treat demos like deployable software. We also cover how to design AI systems that avoid the same mess that SaaS created, why prompt versioning matters more than teams tend to realize at the time, and how startups are outpacing enterprises by staying scrappy, shipping fast, and rethinking delivery in the AI world from the ground up. Plus, we get to hear firsthand stories from Karthik on how to know when you've actually hit product market fit, the emotional math behind a good pivot, and what Karthik learned from living through a $400 million trading system failure that changed Wall Street protocol. Here is Karthik Suresh from O.ai. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Thanks a lot for making the time here. And at O, I understand that y'all really focused on using AI to automate workflows into agents. So let's start with that and tell me a little bit more about O, and then I want to dig a lot more into your opinions on agents.
Yeah, so O, right now it's a horizontal platform to build no-code agents to automate any kind of a business process. It could be as simple as, hey, every day, review my calendar, see who I'm meeting with, go research that person, and then send me like a summary of all the meeting or a pre-call notes to my email. Or it could be like, hey, prepare a battle card for this competitor, to all the way to operations side of things where you need to do some reconciliation with your accounting, with your positions and bank statements. So any kind of a process, a business process, which has a very clear step-by-step like SOP, can be automated using O agents. But the most important part about O is how easy it is to use. A lot of the existing agentic platforms, you need to do some coding, you need to be technical, you need to know what an agent is, or at least you need to know how to drag and drop and attach agents with tools and knowledge base and construct multi-agent workflow and so on. At O, all you need is a prompt. So you can just, it's English language and very natural. You just write a prompt, hey, build me an agent to go do this work, and that's it.
And so I'm gathering that your end user doesn't have to be very technical.
The end user doesn't have to be technical. Yeah, so there's a lot of products for technical users. Obviously, we heard about Cursor and Windsurf taking off. And there's a lot of existing agentic platforms, Zapier, N8Ns of the world, but you got to be technical to use them. You need to know some level of knowledge about agents. Below, you don't even need to know what an agent is.
And one of the things I really love about making the complex so accessible is that you start to see some really unique and surprising ways in which folks use the platform. And I'm curious, as you study the use cases of how folks are using Double O as you're helping your customers, what might be some of the more surprising or delightful use cases that even yourself and your co-founder may not have thought of?
Yeah, it's funny, when you're looking to fundraise, we talk to a lot of VCs, and the one thing almost this is two things they do. One, almost without fail, almost every VC they want some version of a Y Combinator. Go to ycombinator.com/launches, scrape the page every day, and research what the company does and who the founders are, and send me an email, or add it to a spreadsheet, or some version of that. That's like literally without fail something to do with YC. Go scrape some YC page, do some research. So that's like you can see the obsession with the YC there. And then the other one is like, if you do a competitive interest, like, oh, how do I compare with Sequoia, right? It's some version of that. So those are like some of the use cases. The other interesting use cases I've seen is like, one person was like, hey, I want to help, my son is, he has a band. I want to get him his album added to all these playlists on Spotify. So go to top playlists on different web pages, scrape all of them, find how to add it, kind of links, and then create a spreadsheet so that my son can go click on each of them and add the band. So stuff like that. It's just people come up with all kinds of very interesting use cases.
Speaking of agents, I know that there's a lot of investment that's going into agentic development, and especially in the enterprise, where a lot of the companies are not quite yet ready to build software at a fast pace. Now, building agents at a fast pace is like a new challenge that's been layered on top. And I saw a McKinsey study recently that said that only 10% make it from proof of concept to production. And I'm sure some of that is just the nature of experimentation, and that's not necessarily the best yardstick. At the same time, it does seem pretty low, given how powerful the agents can be. So I'm curious if, in your work, you've seen where some of the pitfalls are, or why that number is so low.
To be honest, I think even 10% is actually a higher number, believe it or not. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. One, the whole this agentic workflow processing, or agentic process automation. The previous version was like RPA, right? The robotic process automation. Now it's agentic process automation. So it's a very new concept. I mean, this was not even possible even 6 months ago. Only now, with all the advanced models and reasoning, and now models are able to call tools. So again, just to step back a bit. So what's an agent? Agent is something which has an LLM as a brain, and has some knowledge base and context, and then some tools like APIs or web search, some kind of a function calling. So that all of them put together is an agent, which enables the LLM to take action in the real world. So that's where it can call a restaurant and book, or go update Salesforce. So that's kind of how the agent started, and the LLMs are very non-deterministic beasts. So traditionally, if you run an if loop a million times, you always get the same answer. Even if you run the same prompt 10 times, probably 3 out of 10 times you get a different answer. So then but then you need a high degree of accuracy and reliability, for any enterprise business process, like, let's say invoice management. You just cannot afford to go wrong even like 1 out of 10 times. So forget 3 out of 10 times. So there is a lot of promise, and it's also like much easier now to build AI apps, because there's so many there's cursors of the world, and there's a whole culture of vibe coding, where you can quickly spin up an app, and it looks cool as a demo, and you show it to a potential client, and they're like, oh wow, this is awesome, I want to do a pilot. But once you do a pilot, you probably tested it like a few times, but during the pilot, when you actually test it for this 10 times, 100 times, you realize, oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't work half the time. It doesn't work 30% of the time. And then they realize, oh, then they need to go back to the drawing board and figure out, like, okay, why this is happening. So everyone is learning. The customers are learning, the builders are learning, the VCs are learning. So we are in that phase. So it's actually lower than 10%. And the way to solve it is to figure out, like, how do you have not just one agent, but like almost a cluster of agents doing any single task? Like it's almost like the way kind of recreate a human team. You have the junior analyst doing the work, and some mid-level manager like giving guidance and mentoring the junior analyst to go back and forth and do the work. And finally, the whole thing is done. You give it to some VP who actually like kind of like finally signs off. So you kind of replicate the same thing with agents. You have like one agent just doing the work with scraping the web and collecting some data about a report. Then another agent just reviewing that report to meet if it meets the client's instructions and asking it to redo or go back and forth. And finally, when the whole report is constructed, you have like an overall supervisor who just signs off to make sure that everything is fine. So you need to like really think about the agentic architectures and the workflow architectures to really get it right. And people are getting it there now. So I think in the future, I would say probably another 3 to 6 months, we'll be there where the adoption is going to be hopefully higher, than way higher than 10%. But as of today, I think it's even low. It's probably a single digit percent.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's a good clarifier in terms of where you think that number really is. And like I mentioned, I don't know that it's necessarily the right metric anyway, because the impact that they have is probably a better way. That being said, I do like this mind model that you brought up of the metaphor of a team and having different specializations, right? And so I imagine, the training and tuning of these agents are going to be kind of more focused on what roles they play, but also different types of agents that you can kind of bring into this cluster in your architecture. I think a lot of folks use ChatGPT and therefore think the chatbot is the first kind of approach to bringing an agent about. But there's of course like many types of agents that kind of sit beyond that. So maybe tell us some more about your opinions there and how you pick and choose between them at Double O.
Yeah. So yeah, if you look at the different types of agents, and I'm glad you brought this up. So I think there is, first, of course, there's a chatbots, ChatGPT and Cloud, which is great. Like I use ChatGPT all the time, and which is great for single tasks. Like, hey, go rewrite this email or go create some LinkedIn post for me, or, I'm basically researching this startup or this person or this podcast. Give me some ideas on how to answer. So that's great. But you can't really do like a business process automation where, go to this Google Drive folder, download this PDF file, then read all the content, go update this spreadsheet, connect to the Salesforce and update the CRM, and then send me a final report, right? So that becomes a very multi-agentic architecture. And again, it's not just about building that multi-agent architecture, it's also making it work consistently for thousands of times. And that's where the agentic platforms like Double O comes in. So in the agent land, there are, the first category is vertical agents, right? There is like Harvey is one for lawyers, and 11x is for SDRs or sales. And so you have very specific agents doing very specific tasks. And those are basically replacing the SaaS tools, which were there before, right? But the only issue there is like they don't talk to each other. So my only gripe with that model is like we don't want to create a SaaS world again. In the previous world, there's hundreds. I mean, even as a startup, we had like 50 plus SaaS tools, and we don't want a world where there's an agent for every team which doesn't talk to each other, and there's no context. And imagine now you have like instead of 50 tools, you have like some 10,000 agents running around in your cloud. You have no governance, visibility. They don't talk to each other. And, you don't want to create that SaaS world with agents. So that's where I think there has to be somewhere where there are places where specialized agents like vertical agents are required, but other places I don't think it should be so specialized. Then there are agentic frameworks for developers like LangChain, Crew AI, OpenAI has an SDK, Google has its own SDK now. That's for developers to build custom agents internally. Then obviously the chat-based agent, I would extend the chat-based agent to like Manus and Azure Copilot, where they are like really easy to use, but they're not reliable. You can't depend on it to get this business process to work, correctly for every single time, especially a complex one. And then finally, there are processes like Zapier and NA10 and Gumloop and so on, and they work really well and they are reliable. But you need a technical person to know how to build those and like build those workflows. So you need to have some kind of an implementation team in your company which can use that and build it for you. So yeah, and then where Double O comes in, like I mentioned before, is like we are trying to go after non-technical folks, so anybody can just prompt to build agents to then go do the work for them. So that's kind of the lay of the land.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. I did want to double click on something you mentioned there of not wanting to create another kind of SaaS ecosystem here, presumably because agents are a lot more powerful. One thing I'm reading between the lines there is, we are SaaS consumers, and it takes a fair amount of that integration work to have the different tools between an ERP and a CRM and a timekeeping system and everything talk to each other. Even though the leadership team and other folks on the team know that having the data all off of one plane can reveal a lot better decisions and better insights. What are some other things that you're worried or you want to avoid in terms of creating the SaaS world that we've already created?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if you look at the SaaS world, like there's a reason why Salesforce doesn't talk to Jira. It's because salespeople don't talk to engineers. And that doesn't mean sales agents cannot talk to engineering agents. So there's this mental model of how the world was built or software was built in the last decade or so based on how human teams collaborate. But why do we need to do the same thing with agents? So it's again from first principles, right? You need to really rethink from first principles. Like agents have these capabilities. They can share databases. They can share context. Like imagine like a sales agent pitching a customer. It already knows exactly what's being shipped in the roadmap from the product manager agent. Versus also the product manager agent knowing exactly what the roadmap to build because it has access to all the sales conversations from the sales agents. So I think that's how people need to think about it. It's again, I'm just taking sales and engineering as an example, but in the medical it could be a very different kind of a setup. In supply chain it's a very different setup again. But the SaaS tools were productivity tools built for human teams, where agentic platforms or agentic tools are something which can be autonomous and can be independently do the work, or in the most case, irrespective of who is on the team and all that. So that's what you need to keep in mind as first principles when you build, you come up with your agentic architecture for your company.
And speaking of the architecture there, one of the things that other guests on the show, as well as some of the folks I work with, are looking to hedge against or de-risk is sort of the vendor lock-in, right? I used to be at Pivotal, and we helped a lot of folks with deploying their applications into a multi-cloud environment. And so they weren't locked into AWS or Azure or whoever. And there's sort of understandably a similar fear that's permeated from that world of there's new models coming out every day almost. There's open source versions, there's the commercial versions, and there's different use cases and different agents. And you may want to swap your models out, I imagine. So there's a bunch of questions I have about architecture, and maybe let's get started with what are ways in which you might want to mitigate against being locked into any specific model so that it's easier to switch it in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it all comes down to the prompts because in an ideal world, the same prompt would work for an OpenAI model versus a Gemini model versus an Anthropic Cloud model or a Llama model. But in reality, it's very different. So the way you write prompts, the way you also like there's also the tool calling capabilities, especially if we talk about agents, which is also sometimes very different. Like the tool signature, which the Gemini model understands, is nuanced. It's slightly different from the signature which other models understand. So what you really need to do is you need to have some kind of a versioning for your prompts. So you can't have static prompts deployed in your, let's just imagine once you have a static prompt deployed in your code base and you have like some 100 or 200 pipes, there's no way you're going to go to every single pipe and update it if you want to change a model. You're locked in. So the best way to deal with it is versioning. You need to apply versioning for both prompts and also the tool descriptions and anything which touches interfaces with the LLM. And that way you can say when you have a new model, then you can like iteratively only deploy like, let's say you have 100 pipes. Then you can, test with like 5 pipes and 10 pipes with Gemini. Like say you have OpenAI for 100 pipes. Now you're moving to Gemini. You can have a V2 or V3 for those five pipes and then test it with Gemini and then slowly roll out. And if it doesn't work or there's some issue, you can roll back to the previous version. So you can do all of that. So the key thing there is to like build versioning from the day one.
That makes a ton of sense with respect to versioning. I hadn't thought of that before. And I've had to change the way that we kind of not just architect, but also change our software delivery process as we realize that agents work differently. There's more opportunities, but also things that don't necessarily work. And I'm curious, on your end, what are some things that you have noted or changed in the way that you lead your teams and you lead your development on the architecture and delivery side now that you're working with agents?
So on the delivery side, I think there's two parts to that. One is more the implementation side, the other is the architecture side. On the implementation side, we feel like there's way more hands-on implementation required for delivery, meaning like, everyone is learning about agents. The enterprises are all learning about what agents are. And if you just show them, okay, this is your multi-agent workflow to do contract management. Now go figure. They are like, no, I need help. So you need to have some kind of a forward deployment engineer. I was reading somewhere that forward deployment engineer is one of the hottest roles right now. It's basically AI implementation or AI consulting. And so where you go on site, sit next to the customer and help implement these workflows so that or deploy these workflows, find if the data is in a different place, figure out how to attach that data to this agent so it can access. So some kind of a ETL as well is required. And then obviously a lot of security stuff, like how do you make sure that's behind certain firewalls? Yeah, that's another stuff. And then the last thing is the models itself. Like, are you okay using OpenAI like commercial models? But then if the commercial models, and can I put it in a Bedrock or a Azure instance so it's more secure and the data is not shared? Or I'm like, no, this cannot leave my data center, which in that case, you cannot use any of these commercial models. You got to use like a Llama or something else, some other open source model where you can deploy that internally and use that. But then if you had implemented all your workflows using OpenAI and suddenly the client is like, hey, I need Llama, then you need to like redo the whole deployment. So there's so many moving parts all the way from implementation way down to the architecture level and also the infra level. It really so obviously depends on a use case by use case basis.
You brought up that really good point around switching maybe from a commercial model to Llama because of where the data needs to be. There's a lot of different reasons that can come up. And it's not just changing models. There's a lot of things we like to change as we're figuring things out and getting towards product market fit, something else that I want to get into with you. But staying on this topic here, I come from a world where we believe a lot in test automation and even test driving our code. And that gave us like really good documentation so other engineers could pick up and continue maintaining the code and managing it, modifying it. It gives the product and engineering team like a really strong safety net or confidence level through like CI/CD and good test coverage, knowing that, hey, if we did break something, it'll show up in the tests. And if nothing shows up, then go forth and keep going fast, right? And it allowed us to iterate really quickly. And we're forming new opinions on how to do this with in the prompting world. And I'm curious if you've got ways in which you're kind of bringing that test automation mindset to when you're interfacing with LLMs.
That's a great question. And it's one of those things which people should be doing way more. And we typically call it as evals, right? So it's evaluation, like how you tested your prompt and it worked great, and you put it in production, it's running for thousands of times. How do you know it's working correctly for every single time? I mean, obviously you can see the output and maybe say, oh, maybe something went wrong, but like what does the test framework look like for that? And that's exactly where evals come in. So what we do is like we have a real-time eval, like we talked about in the agentic architecture, where like another agent is automatically correcting another agent, a junior agent, if it's like not doing the work. There's one level of QA already happening. But and in addition, there is in parallel, there is a separate evaluation process running. For example, let me give you a very simple example. Let's say the prompt is like, go use your search tool to go search the web for top three AI startups or something like that is a prompt. And then you run it, and then you run it 1,000 times. Maybe like 900 times it actually went and searched the web using the tool. But maybe another 100 times it just hallucinated. It happens all the time. It never even called the tool. So how are you going to find that out? So you're going to use another agent, basically, which goes through what the input was, what the output was, what the tool calls was, and have all the metadata available, which is evaluating, like of 1,000 times it ran, how many times it actually called the tool, and you use that data to then go back and if you require, you could even fine tune, but or you can change the prompt and go back and run it again and again, and then make sure you have a really high percentage of evals succeeding, and then you put it in production. So building this evaluation framework is very important. The one end of the spectrum is catching errors and catching issues, but the other end of the spectrum is catching hallucinations, right? And that's which is new compared to the traditional software stack, where you never have to worry about the if loop getting a wrong answer, even if you run it a million
Mm-hmm.
times. But here, it's a new concept. So you got to program for that on the test side of things.
And in this world, are there any tools that you find particularly useful or good, or frameworks that help you with your evals?
Yeah, I mean, we are working with a tool called Ocario, and there's so many other tools and observability platforms out there which you can use. But yeah, that's I think another new category of AI startups right now. Agent to agent communications, that's another hot topic, but I think we are slightly ahead of the because right now we just talked about earlier in the call how the even just agent adoption is the single digit percent. So we still don't have agents being deployed reliably across the enterprise. Obviously, people are already talking about, okay, agent to agent communication, how to make it work. So it's still a nascent thing, still not a thing yet, but people, are thinking, making a big thing out of it, but it will be like in 6 months or maybe sooner. And the whole idea here is the same thing we talked about, like how Salesforce doesn't talk to Jira. But if you have a Salesforce agent and a Jira agent, how can you get them to talk to each other with some standard protocol? And there's different companies are building different protocols. Obviously, the Google A2A seems to be the most adopted version. So you have like a Dropbox agent and a Google Drive agent and a Salesforce agent. They can all like figure out what functions each support, and then you can kind of get them to interact with each other. And that's coming, but I think it's still a little bit too premature to talk about those things because we still don't even have agents properly working and adopted in the
Mm-hmm.
enterprise land.
That is, I think, a ton of super valuable experience that you bring to the table around the delivery architecture and implementation of agents and agentic apps. I wanted to go back to something that I think you've got a ton of experience in around product market fit. And I believe it was at the company Kraft that there were a ton of pivots. So maybe tell us a little bit more and set the audience up for the context there, and then we can dig into, the product market fit details second.
I think on the journey to product market fit, it's very rare that your first idea is the one which just works, right? It usually takes a bunch of iterations and pivots in various. I mean, the extreme pivot is the whole. whole ICP and the product is different, but more likely you're probably targeting the same ICP and you're changing the product set, or you are having the same product but changing your ICP and seeing who actually has a willingness to pay and more. It's a more painful problem. In the case of Craft, it was the latter, where the product was a company intelligence product, where given any company, it would go, give you the all possible data points about the company, the finances, the locations, the ESG metrics, and office location, all of the data points on a company profile. And initially, the idea was, okay, let's go sell it to hedge funds because maybe they want to track some signals on, like, for example, how the number of jobs on the site can actually be a predictor of how a company can be doing. So you can use that for your investment. So that was the idea. Then we realized quickly that hedge funds are great. They pay us a lot of money, but they, it's like the alpha is very limited. Once they use it, it's gone, and you can't keep repeating it to like hundreds of hedge funds. So that was not a bad good use case for at least a venture scale business. Then we pivoted to sales teams because you could use it for some kind of a lead gen, right? You can see that, hey, this company hired a new CTO. So I'm a developer tool company, so maybe I should go pitch my developer tool to this company because I'm sure this person is now looking to change its whole developer stack, right? That was the second pivot. And there, the issue was the contract value or the willingness to pay was not as high. So they would pay like $10, $20 a seat, but it's not, we would never get like hundreds of thousands of dollars as contracts from companies. So same issue. So there was appetite, but it again would never be a venture scale business. And finally, where we found product market fit was in supply chain, like supply chain vendor due diligence. Every time you onboard a vendor, you want to make sure the vendor is legit. They actually claim who they are. There are no negative reviews. There are no sanctions. There's no like issues with them. And that was like almost like a great find because those contracts are even you can go up to seven-figure contracts, which especially large supply chain teams. And that's where we found product market fit. And it took I think it took a couple of years to get to like the first 100K in revenue, and then next just 1 year it was like several million in ARR, right? Because once you find the product market fit, you just take off.
And I think you mentioned that you were the first employee at Kraft, right? And so
That's
I'm
correct.
guessing you got to work pretty close with the founding team. And this term product market fit is sort of ambiguous in a way.
Yeah.
And even in the story that you mentioned, there were various reasons why the pivots were to different target audiences or different problems you're looking to solve, different approaches to the solution. What was was there sort of like one or two things you were generally looking for, or what was the internal language around product market fit, and how did you know that someone else on the team probably was seeing the same thing with respect to that question?
Yeah. So, I mean, in generally, we are basically the way we are, at least we were thinking about product market fit was, you can repeatably sell to the same type of customer and also retain them, over at least a 90-day horizon. So the repeatability is important in both in terms of the ICP and in terms of the feature you're selling or the use case you're selling, and also you're able to retain the customer, right? Then to take it a step forward, then what is the customer acquisition cost? So then you can acquire those customers at a cost which is lower than the value, the lifetime value of the customer. So step two is now once you're repeatedly able to sell and you can provide value, then are you able to acquire that customers at scale? And that's when you start growing. Um, but the third thing, which is with Ignition, which wasn't very clear to us, where the first two was there, we were able to repeatably sell to product marketing, and we were able to acquire product marketing as customers. But the issue there was the budget wasn't there, the willingness to pay wasn't there. So they would initially buy one or two seats, and we would be like, "Oh, great!" And then we are acquiring more people, and they're all buying, and they're using, and they're not churning, but it never expanded. So the last part of it, which is also a lot of people miss, is you need to be able to show expansion. The net NRR is also an equally critical metric in coming up with whether you have product market fit or not. So that was one of the main learnings from Ignition side of things.
So that's like a very, I'd say, objective, measured approach to it. And in my experience, that's usually kind of, in hindsight that we're able to kind of assign the data into what was happening. In the room, there's usually a little bit more instinct, emotion, debate that goes on. So I'm curious, like between yourself and the founding team and everyone else that was kind of really in the throes of this decision, there's oftentimes this question, right, of, hey, do we double down here and stay the course and we're quitting too early? Or, hey, the signs are clearly obvious that we should, like the next thing makes sense. And I'm curious if you can remember kind of what that looked like in the boardrooms or how
Yeah.
some of those decisions actually kind of came to being.
Yeah. You're spot on. I mean, in hindsight, it's so easy to like come up with all these frameworks and like say, oh yeah, the data doesn't say that. But in reality, when you're going through it, the thing which leads to this conflict or emotions is because you as a founder is doing this because you have so much conviction on this idea or the product. And that's why you're willing to work long hours and, basically like power through building the great product you want people to see. But the same conviction can become a bottleneck for you to see that its product is not working. And that's where all these emotions and conflicts became. You just, oh, maybe if we add this one other feature, it's going to work. Or it's just the market is still not there, but I'm betting in 6 months we're going to get there and it's going to work because I have conviction. So I think the most important thing I've seen, and most successful founders and most successful companies I've seen, is having that balance between having like conviction on what you're building and then setting the vision and leading the whole company towards that goal, but also being agile enough to realize when something is not working, being able to understand and then being able to pivot. And that's where the board, your advisors, your board members, your angel investors are very helpful because they are more of a like an objective. They are like seeing from the outside, and you are in it day to day, every day, and you don't see it more often than not. And they are the ones that you should rely on them more often than not. And they are like, hey, they should be like, hey, maybe it seems like it's not going to be a venture scale business. Maybe it seems like it's this feature you think is going to actually make the product work is that's not the real reason. And let's talk about that. And then you start pulling the data, then you start taking a step back, looking at the big picture, the market, and then saying, okay, is this the path we want to take? Is we want to pivot? And then once you start, then it's almost like there's a lot of hesitation to even just start that conversation, right? Because you're so going towards building your the product you have in your mind and then building your vision. And once you kind of figure out, oh, okay, this is not working. Actually, let's figure out what's going on. Then it becomes, and then everything just becomes clear. And then you're like, what the hell? Like it is so all of the things are right here. How come I didn't see them before? Right? So that's kind of what typically happens. It's never like, oh yeah, the data is saying X, let's go pivot. And that's never has happened in any of the startups I work for.
You know, that aha moment, can you, like, is there like a particular story you might be able to talk a little bit more to, make it a little bit more relatable for us?
I mean, for talk about just things maybe on the craft side of things. And craft side of things, the aha moment was less on that something was not working, but something was working better. And so none of I was talking about this time where we are selling to salespeople or company, or we're selling this company due diligence to hedge funds or sales. But then none of us had a background in supply chain, and we had like one major defense company come in and say, "Hey, I want to use this for vendor due diligence." And we were like, okay, it's going to cost you $500 a month or whatever this is for 100 companies. And they were like, no, no, we have like 10,000 companies. And then we're like, oh, this can be $1 million contract. I'm like, and then we are like, what are we doing? Like, why are we selling this, $500 a month or $100 a month for this other subset of audience who's never going to expand and never going to be venture scale? Here, this one company, one supply chain division, it can go up to $1 million, and that's it. We're like, okay, let's get together, let's pivot. I mean, that was like very pivot. I mean, that was one of the big milestones which led to this pivot.
And so moving from craft then to ignition and double O, you went from being the first employee to on the founding team
Yeah.
that also was in the throes of this. And you're working with at least one co-founder that may or may not had experienced such a massive pivot before.
Yeah.
So describe maybe what that was like for you firsthand, and then also maybe what roles you played in terms of determining whether this was the right move?
Yeah, so here in this case, in Aviation case, it's a little bit different. One, of course, we knew that the product marketing or product management was not a big audience, so the willingness to pay was lower. It's not, the accounts were not expanding. So we were already like looking to see if we need to pivot, but we still had conviction in our product. We would have probably gone another couple of years to see if we can get it to a, I don't know, like 20 million, 30 million business and then sell it. But here the issue was not product or persona, but the tech is whole Gen AI thing because it's almost like a tectonic shift in the way people approach software. It's almost like when software as service became service as software now with agentic world, right? So it was that which we were like, okay, in a couple of years, a lot of these SaaS tools, including Ignition, won't be around because you don't need a product to project manage your data and workflow and collaborate when you can have agents which will actually go do the work. So you need a software to go manage these tasks or anything like that. So that was when we were like, okay, we either got to shut down or sell or we got to pivot. And that's how the double O pivot happened. It's more led by Gen AI versus like hesitation on the persona side of things.
That makes a ton of sense. And another thing that I'm curious about is what it's like working at a startup, a scale up like you were at Kraft, and then you've also been at Meta and Facebook. And off the top of your head, what are maybe some of the biggest differences that come to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually very, very different, It seems like, oh, you're a PM at Facebook you're a PM at a startup because the number one thing is the amount of resources you have at a company like Facebook or any large company is, you have your whole team, you have the entire engineering team, a designer, sometimes a user researcher, a data scientist, like you have the full set of resources and you can hire more people and, you can borrow resources from other teams, you can get more budget. So there, as a PM, you're probably doing product work in larger companies for like 30% of your time. That's the flip side. The flip side is like you're not doing the 70% of the time is like you're unblocking your engineers, you're coming up with a roadmap, you're talking to the legal and policy team to make sure to get approvals for your new features. So you're doing reviews with director and VP and like basically going through the whole bureaucracy to get all your features approved to go ship it. And that's like 70% of your job. But you have a ton of resources. In a startup, you have none of these. So you got to be very scrappy. You just like, oh, I need to get this done. I don't have a data scientist. I need to figure out how to write SQL queries and go get the data myself and run the analysis and then figure out like what's the cohort analysis look like. I can't just tell it to another person. Or if you don't know how to do it, you need to go figure out how you can quickly hire a person on Upwork or somewhere and then get it done. And now it's going to be agent, like how I can build an agent to go do it for me. I guess the world is changing, but you got to be really scrappy with actually getting it done. And the mindset is very different. And the skill set, it's almost, you need to be a jack of all kind of a if you're a startup employee, and especially early stage. Again, startup is like, it could be a later stage startup which behaves like a big company, but I'm talking about early stage when I'm in a startup. You almost need to be a jack of all. Like a Swiss knife, and you need to do a little bit of coding, you need a little bit of this querying, you need a little bit of marketing, you need to know how to write a website blog. You're kind of doing all of these things as a PM. Whereas at a large company, it's very different. So I think those are the two, and I think as a startup PM, you probably have better chances of success at a larger company because of your role. Whereas I find it's actually the other way around is not really true, where just because you worked at a large company for 10 years doesn't mean you become an excellent startup PM, after those 10 years. In fact, you'll probably struggle even more than somebody like a newcomer because you've been so conditioned to all the resources. You've been conditioned and spoiled with all the resources and capabilities you've had at a big company. So it's going to be really hard for you to adopt.
Yeah, I've lived that on both sides, and I tend to agree with you. One of the things that we've done at Integral with respect to helping companies with digital transformation is surprisingly to the customer who hired us, we would go to someone on the finance and budgeting side and have like a big enterprise find ways to throttle funding, right? Because we found that there wasn't enough scrappiness, there wasn't enough obsession, there wasn't like a lot of
Mm,
creative problems coming because there wasn't the context that I think is created from the constraints that startups tend to have.
yeah,
Um, and you end up having fewer people on the team and therefore higher bandwidth communication, and the percentage of context on the team ends up being a lot higher, and the problem
yeah.
solving ends up, in my opinion, being more creative. You've gotten to live this yourself, and I'm curious if you tend to agree or not, and any advice you might have to folks at big companies around how to maybe help their teams through constraint.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea to set artificial constraint, right? Even if there is no constraint right now, set some artificial constraint and goals, and that's what differentiates a good leader versus not. But I think right now, I was just thinking about, oh, this is like a post pre-AI world. I probably have a bunch of ideas on how you could do it, but right now, Gen AI itself is a big constraint, and you can see that all the people who are refusing to adopt AI are having a hard time finding a job or even staying on their jobs. And it's on the VPs, and have like real, I mean, the CEOs have directive from the board to make sure to deploy the AI strategy. The CEO then push it down to their VPs and the middle management to make sure everyone is AI literate. And then how are we doing it? So right now there's already a huge constraint in terms of AI to get like more agile, automate a lot of the tasks, and obviously cut a lot of like all the monotonous manual things you were doing before. So that's a great way to push your team. It's just like almost saying, "Hey, look, Gen AI is here, and it's only gonna get better." So if you cannot figure out like how to use AI to automate a bunch of things and then kind of almost reinvent yourself to the post Gen AI world from the SaaS world, I'm sorry, you're going to be obsolete. It's just a reality. It's happening. And I'm hoping like I think this itself is a good enough reason for, everyone all the way from the board down to the most junior manager to get their teams to like really align on getting scrappy and getting more AI literate and getting, lot more stuff done creatively.
Yeah, I feel like um, as we kind of work with both startups and big companies, generally speaking, the adoption of generative AI at the startups is way higher,
Yeah.
even in comparison to enterprises that have different enterprise licenses with all the security and privacy provisions and everything built in from Anthropic or OpenAI. And my guess has been they've got big databases
Yeah.
and really rich CRMs and assistants, like human assistants,
Yeah.
at the enterprises that the startup founders and their founding teams don't have. And so they're just naturally kind of forced to do it, number one. And then number two, I think there's also a lot more knowledge sharing that happens across smaller teams. So there's like a communal adoption. Um, Curious if there's anything else that comes to mind about, you know, contrasting those.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, hopefully all the startups right now are AI native to begin with. Like, if you're not, then you have, I mean, by everyone, including the CEO, must be writing code on Cursor if you're a tech startup, right? So that's almost like a given. From an enterprise layer, I think maybe it's going to take some time for adoption, and there's different reasons we talked about, and also the agents are not as reliable and so on. But there's a time which is going to be like, you're going to get disrupted pretty fast if you don't change. I mean, so obviously there's some business models which are very defensive and they'll be fine. But for a lot of the other enterprises, I think they are basing on this fact that even in traditionally when enterprises got disrupted, right? Startups, it takes anywhere between 5 to 7 years to like grow, raise Series A, B, C, D, E, F, and then become a large company and become a threat for an already public company. So, and then they're like, I don't have to worry about it next month. I'll worry about it next year or maybe two. And that was the mentality before. But right now, you see a lot of these AI startups. What used to take 2 years, 3 years to get from zero to like 2 billion, 3 million. It's happening in months. The product maturity. So it's the pace at which the innovation is happening is at a very different scale. So I'm guessing this is going to force the hand of the enterprises as well to move quickly in the coming months. It's almost a given. Like I'm not even guessing actually at this point. It is absolutely going to happen that, in the next year or so, you will actually see the enterprises which are not agile and move fast, they will really, really take a big hit. And then the only ones which will survive are which like wholeheartedly embrace the Gen AI. So I think it's coming. It's the previous mindset doesn't apply anymore.
And so for the folks who agree with you on the problem and need a little bit of help getting started on the solution around, say, AI literacy, I'm curious if you've got any nudges, how to's, how to get started, how to know if you're moving in the right direction kind of advice.
The number one advice for the leaders is don't block your employees from using ChatGPT or AI tools. The number one issue I see, it's not even that people are not willing to adopt. It's the companies are blocking the people, even the early adopters who are doing it because of enterprise data issues, privacy issues, trust issues, security issues, and I get it, and that's very important. But you still need to figure out how you can deploy a secure version of a ChatGPT or whatever the enterprise version of OpenAI. Like invest in that, and just don't just say your AI policy is no AI. That's literally the first thing. Like make sure you don't block your existing, at least the ones who are eager and excited to use it to doing this. That's step one. Step two, figure out a few champions in your company who are excited in building use cases and have really like made a big difference in the impact they've had in the job or whatever it is, and use that as a case study in all of your all hands to then showcase what the potential of this is to get other people motivated to then start using AI. And then after that, it's like, okay, have like some kind of a hackathon sessions or some kind of a Gen AI sessions where you encourage people to build, either agents or anything, or just even just use AI to like how they would optimize their day-to-day workforce, and then get them to showcase it. So finally start building in this culture where you're rewarding people, incentivizing people who are using AI to, increase the productivity of whatever they're doing.
Yeah, that's great advice. And something you mentioned earlier around the large companies having this sense of feeling like they're, I mean, I don't know, call it too big to fail or having a lot of security in their size. And maybe there's a hidden uncertainty that they're not necessarily seeing. And looking at your profile and having worked at Knight Capital Group, I'm assuming you got to experience firsthand that things can go sideways very quickly, regardless of size. And so, tell me a little bit more about what that was all like.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting story. So just for context for the viewers, I was at this company called Knight Capital Group way back in 2011. I was like a kid then, and the long story short, we had the highest trading loss ever in Wall Street recorded of $400 million in 30 minutes, which was bonkers, right? And especially for those days. What happened was an algo went rogue. By rogue, I mean there was a bug, and instead of just, I mean, I can't obviously go into the exact details, but just assume that instead of flattening the position, let's say you buy a certain amount of stock and your position, is then you reach your position limit, and instead of selling, it actually started buying more. And then that kind of led to a ripple effect where you ended up accumulating like a huge, I think something like a $2 billion portfolio of stocks where the whole company market cap was $1 billion. So we had to, I think, sell it to Goldman Sachs, who then and then we took a $400 million hit. So that's how the $400 million hit happened. But all of this was because somebody didn't follow a really good tight software deployment process and testing. I think it's more like, hey, I don't test in dev, I test only in production kind of a meme. And that actually happened, I think, in this case, which was sad, but a lot of learnings here.
Wow. And I mean, if you had to guess, what's something that you bring to bear as you're leading teams, as you're growing a business now that might have come from that like very drastic, stark lesson?
Yeah, no, that I still have PTSD from that, but because of that, you now have kill switches in New York and Nasdaq when a stock becomes very volatile, then they do a halt, or they also have a kill switch where they can even pause trading on a whole bunch of stocks. It wasn't there before, and they introduced it only after this Night Capital fiasco. So you need to have something similar in your systems, especially agentic systems. Just imagine like some agent goes rogue and starts calling OpenAI calls again and again and again and again and again, and by in 20 minutes you have $100,000 bill from OpenAI. So it can happen, right? So make sure you have all those alerts in place. Make sure you have kill switches in place. Make sure you have monitoring in place. It's a number one thing, like the risk management to make sure it's less risky. It was less risky in SaaS, but I guess it will get riskier in the world of AI again. So especially as people build agentic AI systems, you have to think about risk management, as one of the first priorities.
This has been a really wonderful, educating, enlightening conversation for me. Some of the things that I like to ask all of the guests here are kind of based on the premise of the show, which is around how do we foster the most engaged teams who then build the most delightful products. So the first thing I like to ask is about teams. And what is a really inspiring team for you that you might kind of try to channel as you're leading your own?
Yeah, so obviously being in agentic land, my dream team is maybe a team of a few people with hundreds of agents. It's almost like Iron Man. Each one has an like Iron Man armor. The armor is just a bunch of agents with superpowers, which is going doing all the work for you, like reading the emails, sending follow-ups, updating the CRMs, scheduling meetings, and all the stuff around you. And that's a dream team. It's just like irrespective of whether you're marketing, sales, or whoever you are, the function doesn't matter. But it's just you're empowered by this whole swarm of agents like basically doing a lot of the monotonous stuff for you so you can focus on the one thing which matters most to your function.
Awesome. And then we'll switch gears to products. And I'm curious recently if there was like a product or a service that you got to experience or unbox that just totally like blew your socks away.
Yeah, I think that happened with Granola, the call recorder. Right now, you have this annoying AI transcription, which services which join the call every time, right? I mean, which kind of records the call and transcript. But with Granola, it's happening on the background. So any call, or even just if I want to just think about my own, I will just talk loudly to like like a capture loom or something, and then I can record it with Granola, and it has like amazing AI transcription and summaries, and then all the noting. So it's almost become like my personal assistant, like note-taking assistant. I would have thought, something like Fathom or Zoom has recording, a bunch of them would be the way to go. But this has been one of the most delightful, very, very tiny, use case, but it's been like so impactful, and had a ton of, saved a ton of time for me.
We'll make sure to have a link to them in the show notes. And speaking of, what is the best way for folks in the audience who are curious to connect with you more or connect with the Double O team? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn handle is Karthik Suresh LBS. My Twitter handle is just Karthik Suresh. And the website, of course, is AI.
Sweet. We'll make sure to have links to all of those as well. Thanks so much for making time and educating us all on your journey and giving us so much advice on building agentic apps, man. This was super fun for me.
Yeah, thanks, Ashok. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode with Karthik Suresh from AI. Some of the key takeaways for me were really around how fragile most agentic workflows still are, and a little bit more structure that's needed to make them truly useful in production. I also loved his analogy about architecting agents like a human team. Rather than having a one size fits all AI agent that does everything, and building a system of specialists with roles, context, specialized development that end up working together, and also considering various forms of agents and not just chatbots. The other part I really appreciated was the honesty around product market fit. He's been in the thick of some really difficult pivot decisions, which are really hard, and he conceded that they're rarely clean. It's emotional, it's messy, it never feels like the right call, and you're balancing conviction with reality, and it's often only obvious in hindsight. And I think that tension between the vision and changing to something is something that a lot of leaders and founders especially relate to. And I also appreciate his advice about leaning on outsiders like advisors, board members, mentors, peers to give you that perspective or whether to persist or to pivot. And something I think really important as a takeaway is around eval frameworks. If I had to bet today, I think it's one of the key things that teams could be doing today to maintain optionality and being nimble as that inevitable pivot decision looms. Whether it's targeting a different audience, solving a different problem, or changing aspects of your solution, like maybe the underlying large language model that powers your app. And that's something that I think is super critical given how fast this landscape is changing and how important it is to preserve that speed and adaptability as you get closer to the product market fit that Karthik and I got to talk about. Right now, it might seem really easy to build something that looks like it works, where you drop in a prompt, you connect a few AI tools in there, you can even spin up a workflow that demos well. But under the hood, how brittle is the system that you're building? These systems do rely on non-deterministic outputs, seemingly opaque tool chains, and prompts that oftentimes will break when you switch models or shift use cases. Karthik got to talk about some of the details about how prompts are catered towards the models now and not really generic or ubiquitous across the industry. Those shifts are happening constantly, and maybe it's like your security or legal team, like he said, that mandates moving from OpenAI to an open weight model like Llama. Or maybe a tool API updates its signature and your agent stops making valid calls, but doesn't log an error and your customers find out before you do. Or maybe someone on your team rewrites a prompt as they're tuning and improving performance, but it entirely tanks your flow. I think this is the kind of fragility that can become expensive super fast. Not just in engineering time, but I think more importantly for where we are in the market with lost trust amongst your team and especially with your customers. What we've seen in the past is teams will start to hesitate to change anything or estimates go up way more. And then you end up slowing down or worse, the work is abandoned altogether. And, there's this naysayer approach of thinking that this just isn't ready yet. And I think similar to how test automations helped us before, eval frameworks can be one of the ways to get out of that trap. And these aren't just manual reviews or model benchmarks that we're talking about. I'm talking about embedded real-time evaluations like the one that Karthik mentioned as well. Runtime checks that can confirm the agents are calling the tools properly, returning expected outputs, or even hitting defined behavioral thresholds. For example, you might track how often a workflow actually triggers the correct API call, or maybe use a secondary model to score whether the generated response meets the specific quality criteria. He mentioned Ocario. I think Ragus is another tool that you can use to have your eval harnesses built and make it a lot easier to implement in real workflows. Another thing is in orchestrated systems, where this becomes even more powerful. Whether you're using LangGraph or Crew AI or AutoGen, you can wire your evals directly into the agentic workflow and the agent loop. So one agent checks another's output, and you can get error flagging or even rerunning some of the subtasks dynamically. And so as you can see, it's more than testing. It's about supervision and monitoring and observability. And similarly to test-driven development and how it helped us ship better software, I think eval frameworks here can help us build better agentic systems that can adapt to your use cases without being fragile. In a space where models, tools, requirements, the customers' expectations are all changing constantly, I think that kind of adaptability is what's going to keep your team moving from product market fit instead of constantly having to put fires out. If you're interested to learn more about eval frameworks, definitely hit us up. And also check out the episode where we had the guest Austin Vance from Focused on. Austin talks in depth about eval frameworks and how his team builds them and the importance of them as well, especially in the context of team culture, delivery velocity, and long-term reliability. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Convergence.fm with Karthik Suresh. As always, we will be back next time with another talk about fostering engaged teams and shipping delightful products. We will see you then. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.